And we are live.
Good morning, folks. It's the one and only V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live with my main man, CJ. And we have with us this morning the one and only London Paul joining us. And you know, when London Paul joins us, you know it's serious, folks. It's absolutely serious. And we're talking about theseriousreport.com. Also, the fact that it is serious. There are serious things going on. Check out his website, seriousreport.com. If you haven't done so already, make the effort to find your way over there and get that membership for less than $5 a month, $4.75, less than the price of a latte. You can get the geostrategic breakdown every single day from Paul himself. Worth its weight in gold. I'm telling you right now, it's worth its weight in gold. Go over there and get it done. Also, check out roguemoney.net, Rogue Money on Facebook, DTube, Steam, every single podcasting app known to humanity, Rogue Money, Apple News. And check out our sponsors, remaincom.net. Whether you guys need to get your credit score fixed, go from a 500 to an 800, or you need money, personal funding or business funding, whatever you need to get yourself going, get up to $600,000 unsecured from our network of 335 lenders. Remaincom.net is the place to get that done. And also check out the cryptoschool.io. Learn while everybody else is sitting there dying because they're on 20 long trades and it's a long hold, and you're seeing everybody's holding to the fact that they're losing money. They don't know what else to do. Here's a solution for you. The cryptoschool.io. Go to the Watch Us Trade Room. Join it after you go through the school because you need to get an education first. Okay. But if you're ready to trade, go to the Watch Us Trade Room. And once you get to the trading room, folks, you will learn how in the ugliest market in cryptos currently, these guys, Crypto Z and Crypto Cowboy, have been able to pull a 250% profit. These guys have made money for people, changed lives, you name it, and they do it with teaching, with patience, and with technical analysis. You'll see it all. The cryptoschool.io. Go there, get it done, sign up, make it happen for yourself. Again, you have two programs. One is the basic introductory course, the curriculum itself, showing you how wallets and exchanges and all that other stuff works. And once you get done with that, or if you're proficient with that already, and you're ready to, just jump into the trading room, start making some trades, just go there. While the price right now is still currently low at $149 per month. That price will be going up, but it doesn't matter because you'll be paying that with your crypto profits. We've had people who literally pay their entire year's worth of membership in 2 days. So serious stuff. And with that out of the way, London Paul, how are you, sir?
Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, where everyone may be listening in the world. Yeah, I'm well, and yourself?
I'm good, man. I mean, we had a bridge collapse in Miami, Florida. QAnon says that's something to do with Edward Snowden, who collapsed. It has nothing to do with the shoddy third world infrastructure that surrounds much of the country, Paul. But it has to do with
how exactly does Edward Snowden cause?
I have no idea.
A bridge collapse.
Or here's the CIA.
I mean, anyway, let's just park.
Yeah. Anyway, what's going on? Where do you want to begin?
Well, I put a tweet out earlier regarding the whole sort of development to do with this Skripal and his daughter, this nerve agent. I don't watch mainstream news, but I'm being kind of reliably informed. It's just permanently on mainstream channels in the UK, morning, noon, and night. And but I think what was interesting is the fact that apparently Porton Down, which is the facility about 7 miles away from where this incident had obviously been asked to test this nerve gas in inverted commas.
Porton Down is their weapons, their chemical experts. These are chemical weapon experts in Porton Down, which coincidentally Cipro live like 2 miles away from. But go ahead.
But yeah, they've said apparently, well, this is what's being said, is that they've been unable to identify the nerve gas or nerve agent as being part of Russian manufacture. And apparently, not really sure in what context, but they've had a lot of undue pressure placed on them, which kind of suggests they're being told to say, well, actually tell the world it is Russian manufacture, or it probably is Russian manufacture, rather like Theresa May saying it's likely to be the Russians. But what this proves is this actually comes out and is proved to be true. It will destroy the narrative that's coming out of well, not just the UK, the US, and the rest of the Western Europe, because let's be honest, we've now also had the French and the Germans, as well as the British and the Americans, saying there's no other plausible explanation than Russia being responsible. Well, the fact they haven't produced a shred of evidence suggests to me that their explanation lacks any plausibility.
Correct.
But I think the Porton Down development's particularly interesting, because if that gets out into the mainstream or becomes conventional wisdom, then that shatters the whole illusion. And I think essentially what Russia's quite happy to allow this debacle to carry on, because in the process, the Western media, Western governments are destroying their own credibility, and that's a very potent weapon from the Russian and Chinese perspective, in terms of the masses of our countries wake up to the reality of what's going on. So when you kind of throw a hand grenade, in inverted commas, into proceedings with Putin's speech to lawmakers about Russian military advancement, they knew full well there'd be a reaction to this. And the reaction is, well, we'll have to do something to discredit Russia. We've got the Russian elections coming up. Well, I hate to disappoint Western governments, but by all accounts, all it's done is galvanized and increased Putin's popularity amongst Russians, who see him being downtrodden for absolutely no reason legitimately. So it's backfired in that respect. But also people in the UK are starting to ask questions. Not huge, not in tens of millions of people, but in a significant number of people are starting to go, hang on a minute. Where's the proof? Back in, we had the weapons of mass destruction where you told us, Saddam was going to kill us all in 45 minutes. You never produced any evidence, and we subsequently found, of course, it was a big lie. Now they're starting to go, hang on, no evidence. Show us the evidence. Prove definitively it's the Russians. And of course, then now people are starting to put, two and two together and piece things together. Now, to some extent, Jeremy Corbyn, who's the Labour leader, threw that into the ring, which stimulated people's interest and made them remember, hang on, something happened back in 2003, and there are parallels and similarities to that. But I think as time goes on increasing, we said it the other day, the narrative and the wheels will fall off it, because there's too many holes. It's so convoluted, all these explanations. I mean, the latest one is that it maybe, in fact, his daughter, it was all over her clothes in a suitcase she bought over from Moscow, or maybe it was in a present that she bought over and then was subsequently opened. I mean, either of those, narratives are totally ridiculous, because first off, are we seriously suggesting that someone would? How did they actually get it all over her clothes in the first place? But she only somehow suffered the consequences of that after her being here for, I don't know how long she was here before, obviously it became a problem. And a present, well, her present from who? It's so ridiculous, but that's how desperate they're getting. And the more desperate they're getting, the more it galvanizes support of Putin in Russia, and the more people are starting to question the narrative and say, hang on, we're not too sure really the reality of what's going on. And in that sense, it's like you always say, you don't always have to attack people directly. Indirectly, comments can be made by the Russians and the Chinese that will have an incendiary effect, whereby the Western media, Western governments and the cabal just implode and lose credibility. And that is a hugely important aspect to making people in the West understand the reality of how their media and their governments operate.
That's the whole entire thing. These guys are trying to push this narrative while the majority of people, and every single poll that's out there, people distrust the media. People distrust the media in a very, very big way, number one. Number two, no one's buying it. And number three, the desperation and the fact that they're trying to ramrod this. They're trying to come up with this this whole entire, everything is a chemical weapon with these people, Paul. Everything. Oh, Saddam has chemical weapons. Oh, Bashir al-Assad has chemical weapons. Oh, Muammar Gaddafi has chemical weapons. Oh, Russia has chemical weapons. No, Russia has 6th and 7th generation advanced missile systems and advanced nuclear weapons and energy weapons to go with that. That's why they don't need chemical weapons. It's the most ridiculous. And they could have killed Cipro. And I was saying this yesterday. They could have killed Cipro while they had him in jail for 8 years. Just ridiculous.
Well, this is the whole point. I mean, it is, but they're relying on the fact that people will just buy into the narrative. And I think also what's happening is people once again are going, hang on, this is the usual MO in the Western media is already pointing fingers and accusing people barely 5 minutes after something's happened, rather than the normal process, which would be, okay, you'll have some media speculation. There's going to be an investigation. The investigation will take, a considerable period of time. And then the results come out, and then the media choose that over. No, they're already damning Russia. It's already, and they're actually fingering Putin directly. Which again, let's paint a scenario. Not that we're suggesting it happened, but let's just imagine there was some rogue elements in Russia who were responsible. Doesn't mean that has nothing to do with Putin. Now, if they'd actually come out and said, we think there may be Russian elements responsible or Russian agents responsible for it, people may have bought that as being more plausible. The fact they came out and blamed Putin directly is just a damning indictment of their stupidity. And then I think what was also pretty damning was the UK Defence Secretary, whose name's Gavin Williamson, came out and said that Russia should go away and shut up. I mean, it baffles me that he should say that. And I think Lavrov's made a typically Russian comment when he said that, well, he apparently said that the UK Defence Minister may lack education.
Absolutely. And what about Nikki Haley's insane comments? Like as soon as what's his name? Tillerson is fired, Pompeo's in, Nikki Haley's back at it again.
Yeah, and making incendiary comments about the fact that Russians may launch chemical attacks in New York.
I mean, Paul, what is on an international stage as a statesman, as a politician, as when you're dealing with a world superpower, which is Russia is. Russia is a superpower. If you have any doubts, you haven't been paying attention. How irresponsible if this was my administration and that woman made that statement, I would fire her on the spot. But you see
and I think
the neocons, Paul, seems to be a full court press. It seems like everywhere I turn, I see a bank, I see a Goldman Sachs banker, or in this case with Larry Kudlow, Mr. Cocaine Kudlow, who was one of the chief architects of the 2008 collapse, or neocons everywhere. And this is the agenda going forward. Very, very disconcerting here, Paul.
Yeah, I think the problem is what it's symptomatic of is, and I think we said way, way back, when we'll reach a certain point in this whole event-driven scenario where things will get that desperate that the cabal and I differentiate the cabal and the neocons aren't one and the same in some aspects. There are similarities and differences, but you've got them, the neocon, all the sort of cabal minions. They're all suddenly kind of come out in such desperation and make the most absurd, ridiculous comments and inflammatory and incendiary. And we're precisely at that point now. And undoubtedly, this has all come about. I mean, we always say timing is everything, but there's no way it's a coincidence that Putin makes his comments about the Russian military, and suddenly as someone said, we've gone on to DEFCON 5 for in terms of the incendiary comments and the attitude that's being portrayed towards Russia. Yeah. I mean, of course, the reality is it's hot air, but it's the only language and the only mentality they understand is to throw these kind of comments around to convince everyone it's business as usual. And now I don't know who they're trying to convince, because Western nations think that the US is still military superior, so they're not going to convince them. They're certainly not going to convince people in the East and in Russia, etc. So are they trying to convince the American people that it's business as usual and we're the dominant nation? It's debatable, but it's not from a position of strength. It's a position of desperation that they know their grasp on what's going on. And I think the fact is Lavrov's comment is extremely telling, because when he came out and said, and there's a sort of, I tweeted this, but there's kind of rough sort of translation where quintessentially in terms of recent development in the global arena and in international affairs, it's the flat unwillingness of the US and its Western allies to accept the fact that a 500-year-long period of domination of the West is coming to an end. Now, absolutely that's true, but once again, it's why is Lavrov saying it now? It's because we've reached another pivotal kind of inflection point in the event-driven scenario. Now, what that means precisely remains to be seen. It can mean many things, but it's certainly we've just taken a huge step forward, and in the process, many dominoes get knocked over, and we get to the next stage. But there's no doubt those kind of comments, the reaction from the Russians, the reaction of the Western media, the reaction of Western governments, and the sheer desperation is palpable, and that's because they know. I think many more of the cabal, the neocons, etc., are now realizing, yeah, this 500-year-long period of domination of the West is coming to an end. Because the one thing that they always had in their favor was to bully smaller nations and have that military threat. Well, when suddenly a world superpower, as you say, and absolutely Russia is one, China's one, these nations, when one of them comes out and says, you're all, in the West, you're all sitting ducks now, there's nothing you can do. Not that we're going to use this technology, we're just warning you. That is a seismic change, and it readdresses and rebalances and recalibrates the whole world in the process. And yeah, there's people in the West who are just going to have to accept the fact that's the way it is. But from my perspective, it's better it's Russia who has those advanced technology. Exactly. Imagine if Clinton had come out and said this. I think we'd be having quite a nervous conversation right now.
Yeah, I would be on a beach somewhere in some warm part of the world while we're doing the show, and yeah, that's where I would be.
I think we'll be broadcasting from Mars with a bit of luck.
Yeah, we'd have to.
Or maybe an entirely different galaxy.
Hello, people of Earth. You have approximately 3 months before your president nukes you to oblivion.
It's unreal. I mean, but of course it does. I mean, it raises the risk and the spectrum. There's going to be a lot of concern about, but most of it is just going to be hot air rhetoric. The obvious case in point is that, as well as what's happened in North Korea, that was a seismic turning point in terms of their inability. We've spoken about that before to achieve any aims. So the Middle East is not kind of panning out for them quite how they expected to in the process. So their opportunities are kind of somewhat limited. Were the two kind of major flashpoints in the world where you think they could start something, particularly probably the Middle East, but North Korea could have potentially been just as incendiary in the process. But of course, that's gone out the window and is no longer the case. So they're also running out of options as to where they can stoke a war and stoke some serious tension. Now, I think the flip side to this is what is this telling us probably about economically what's going on now? We've talked a lot in the past about the economic reality. Now, the thing is, yes, all the real unemployment, 20-odd%, and all the people on food stamps, all the debt, all the unfunded liabilities, 250, 300 trillion, 500 trillion, who knows? I mean, and 21 trillion of debt, etc. These are all extremely interesting. But from the cabal's point of view, it's more interesting is when does the money run dry? All the trillions that have been stolen from here, there, and everywhere. They've had to use that, as we said, and it's worth repeating, even though we only discussed it on Monday, or was it even the other day? I can't remember. But the point is that when that runs dry, they're finished. They've had it. There's nowhere for them to turn. They can't fund or finance anything anymore, and that includes propping up markets. That includes propping up banks. That includes funding the military, etc., etc. So the question then becomes, when is that going to run out? And that's, pardon the pun, a $64 million question. or trillion-dollar question, because we don't really know, but we may be approaching the point where their ability to finance everything is coming to an end now. If that is the case, that would also signal a desperation to come somehow in some very perverse, inexplicable way to start trying to finger Russia for something and try and stoke tensions and start some war or start some military conflict, is precisely because financially they're running out, they're running on fumes nearly, and in the process, what happens then? Well, the reality of the US economy becomes irrefutable, and then you have an economic collapse. Militarily, they can't finance their bases. What are they going to do? They'd have to bring everyone home. So it starts to raise the spectre of that, and that might be something else that we need to factor into what's going on. But certainly, in the last few weeks, there's been some big seismic changes, and that's why we're getting these completely crazy reactions coming from the UK, the US, and less so, but not exclusively those nations. And I think if what we're talking about becomes a reality in the coming weeks and months, it will just get more desperate, more frenetic, more implausible, to the point eventually that I think more and more people will start to wake up and go, hang on, I just simply don't buy this anymore. I mean, it's gone past making, accusatory comments about people or making suggestions or inferring things. It's now reached the point of where it's so implausible that they're going to keep, and the more they do this, they'll wake up more and more people to the reality. And that's one thing they don't want to do. Like we said, if the Portland Down thing was on, the mainstream media news, what would that do to the world and British people? Okay. So basically, now we have to question the entire narrative about Russia to do with everything. It will be a seismic game changer in terms of waking people up and destroying their credibility. And that's what's also a big factor now. It's the destruction of the credibility of governments and the media. I mean, that's something we have to give. I mean, we can be critical of Trump in some ways, but he did a huge amount to destroy the credibility of mainstream media.
Yeah,
that is a big, that's a hugely important thing, because when the credibility of that goes, and in the end, if the credibility of government goes, but people within, say, the government or the Trump administration are critical of things, then people are going to say, well, actually, you have been critical, and fair enough. You might notionally be government, but if you're pointing out there's this swamp, there's this deep state who's causing all these problems, then credit where credit's due. So that's the important part, and I think full well Russia knew when Putin came out with the comments about the Russian military capability, that it was going to have a huge amount of knock-on effects, and some of them will be most certainly by design. Some won't be. Some won't have been expected, but it was done deliberately for a reason. Otherwise, Russia could have told the world 2 or 3 years ago they had this capability, because they already had the capability. And again, it's always about timing. Why does Putin say what he says when? Why does China come out and essentially, in a very kind of barbed way, being very diplomatic and are very careful in their choice of words, but effectively saying to the UK, you need to establish the facts of this nerve agent attack, and a response needs to be under the principles of the UN Charter. What effectively saying to the UK is, establish the facts, and if Russia, under the UN auspices, of the UN, request information or request a sample, provide things appropriately, and let's have a mature adult debate about this. They do it very diplomatically, but it was very telling in a very understated way what their real intention is and what they're telling the British effectively to do.
What's funny is you have Theresa May, who was an absolute spineless, gutless twit when it came to standing up to criminals in Brussels, Belgium, over the whole entire Brexit. Absolutely capitulating, spineless, gutless twit. And now all of a sudden, Paul, she's Winston Churchill, standing in front of Parliament, railing against Russia. If that's not a sign of this woman is a controlled puppet who's doing the whims of someone else. And what is it with the wretched German queen? What's her name? Queen Elizabeth. That's right. All right, Queen Elizabeth, the Goths. Why is it that she wrote a letter about a world war just a couple of days ago?
No, apparently this was back in the Cold War era in the 80s when there was this big idea that, you know, the World War III might have been a possibility. And apparently she wrote some speech that they would have brought out the risk, you know, the risk became a reality. So, and someone's got wind of this because it got disclosed under the 30-year rule. And now they're going, oh, maybe she'll do this again. No, it's a bit of a non-event, non-story. I mean, it's just, but no, in terms of May, what she's not really, and no one in the UK government, because the UK government, like any government, doesn't control anything. Where the real power base is in Whitehall. And just going, people can Google Whitehall. I don't have a read about it. There's no point talking about that in detail. But that's where obviously the real kind of power base is. And effectively, yeah, May's just there to do the bidding of whoever and whatever they say. And in terms of Brexit, the interesting thing is this idea, oh, this whole Russian thing is a deflection away from Brexit. No, that's not the case. Brexit is a huge distraction in that by design, because the reality is it's an irrelevance. The European Union's going to be finished in its current capacity. It doesn't matter whether Britain leaves, stays in the intervening period. That's just a gigantic distraction and you wouldn't want to deflect away from that distraction by creating another distraction, which actually the whole narrative's falling apart. No, it's better that people particularly in the UK, keep focusing on Brexit like it has some meaning and substance. It absolutely has no meaning and substance whatsoever, because the European Union, as we said, will cease to exist in its current form. And it's precisely why you're starting to see nations around Europe. But the biggest hint, if you want, that Europe's changing is look at all the nations who have asked to repatriate gold. You've got Hungary recently. Now people say, oh, it's only a small amount. Well, be careful what you read into official figures, because China and Russia, as we know, have many multiples times the amount of gold according to official records. And of course, the US has virtually none. But look at the nations.
Wrong again. We have deep storage gold, Paul. I don't know how many times I have to say that we have deep storage gold.
Well, that's true. But I spoke about
the Brooklyn to sell you.
Yeah. About the Renaissance nations in Europe being Austria, Finland, Holland, or the Netherlands, and Germany. Well, and we spoke about this for a long time. And what have we noticed in the last few years? Who are the nations who've asked to repatriate their gold? Germany, Holland, Austria. Finland hasn't as yet, but increasingly, of course, I don't know where all the Finnish gold is or exactly how much they've actually got in reality. The reason they're doing this because they're the Renaissance nations for the new Europe. They know full well that gold-backed currencies is the future. That's why they want to repatriate their gold. People are going, well, Hungary wants to do it because they're terrified about what's happening with Brexit and the UK economy. Well, yes, that's true, but that's not the reason. And actually, that's the other thing to do with the UK economy. Brexit is a great excuse to blame the fact that the UK economy is falling to pieces and falling apart. We talked about Carillion a while, but that's just the kind of, well, it's the tip of a huge iceberg. The UK economy is in a mess. So it's great to go, well, if we implement Brexit, well, what we can do then is we can start blaming the fact that the UK is going to lose, this business, or the financial centre in London is going to collapse. I mean, Unilever announced the other day they were moving operations out of the UK and having their headquarters back in Rotterdam, and everyone goes, oh, it's to do with Brexit. No, it's because the Dutch government intelligently said, we'll give you some concessions to move your business back to Holland. And they went, yeah, thank you very much, we'll do that. It's got nothing to do with Brexit, but it's a great excuse for the British government to go, well, Brexit's to blame. So that's why they don't want to deflect away from Brexit as well. They desperately want to keep that mantra going because it gives them an excuse when everything falls apart to go, oh, well, it's to do with Brexit. Well, of course, it has nothing to do with it. So that's something else that's worth mentioning. But yeah, in terms of someone actually mentioned, I caught my eye talking about, and I did tweet about this, and I made a kind of flippant comment that we had this thing where this Russian aircraft took off and its cargo doors were open or something, and it dumped a load of gold. And I mentioned the point: is this helicopter money Russian style? Because,
Russian style. In Russia,
I mean,
we do not have helicopter money.
no,
We have
we just have we have real money, which is gold, and we dump it on. No, I mean, it's just a pure accident. I mean, someone didn't lock the doors properly, but imagine you driving along a highway or motorway, as we call them. Suddenly, it's like there's the sky's raining 20-kilo bars of gold. Or imagine if that landed on your roof. I mean, it would. Yeah, you'd be pretty scared. But yeah, apparently they recovered all the gold. And yeah, it was just a simple mistake.
I'd be happy that a 24 kilo bar of gold damaged my car. That'd be great.
Yeah, you'd just be loading it in the back of the car and going, well, that more than
each kilo bar is $50,000. Yes, I'll back it up. Each 2 kg is $50,000. I'll back it up.
Well, the fact that 20-kilo bars is actually $1 million. Yeah, they were 20 kilos.
Jesus Christ, Paul, let me do the math here, bro.
I think apparently it was they said it was about 350 to $400 million worth of gold.
Jesus. Oh my God, 20 kilos. That's
it's about $1 million.
Yeah, it's about $800,000.
Yeah, I mean, give or take. I mean,
$1,000 per bar.
I mean, if you
pellet my car, they could pellet me with that. I don't care.
Yeah. But yeah, the important, and this is the important fact. Sometimes I get people messaging me going, well, you don't talk about gold and silver very much, or look, I made the point clear. I'm not going to keep going on and on about it, but let's just draw a line under this until there is some significant development, like a nation announce a gold-backed currency. The reality is, gold and silver will underpin the new financial system.
Yep,
and that is absolute certainty. It's precisely why China, Russia, and countless other nations are buying gold like there's no tomorrow, and nations are repatriating gold. The gold price and the silver price are irrelevant. They will be manipulated till the day the paper market eviscerates and it's game over, and we have the reset, and the reset will reset the gold price, because at the end of the day, that's all the reset is. Effectively, it's China and Russia saying, well, we've got this much gold, we want to back our currencies, we're going to reset the gold price to back our currencies. And that will be what resets the gold price. And of course, correspondingly, currencies that are backed by gold, or in the case of nations like the US, where it isn't backed by gold, then correspondingly currencies will be devalued on the basis of that. That's what it is. There's no magic revaluation of currencies based on hot air. It's as simple as that. So nothing changes. The position of gold and silver will remain the same. And likewise, there will be cryptocurrencies in the future. Blockchain will be here to stay. That we're not going to see the end of it. We'll see an evolution of cryptocurrency. And as I've said, asset-backed ones is, whether people agree or not, will be the future. And we're seeing sort of, small signs of people issuing gold-backed or whatever cryptocurrency. They're kind of what I call first-generation asset-backed. The big hitters will be the second generation that comes out. And one example, and the Russians have already put their head above the parapet, is the crypto ruble. That's precisely where the future lies. So gold and silver and cryptocurrencies and blockchain will be what underpins the financial system in the future. Nothing's changed. Nothing will change that is the reality. So I can go on about, well, the price of gold be manipulated. Well, everybody knows that. And it's not going to change, but it doesn't matter, because if you believe in gold and silver, if you don't, great, don't believe in it. If you believe in it, well, if you can afford to buy more at very ridiculously cheap prices, then do so, because I actually think silver has far more mileage than gold in terms of the price. I think that just because the ratio 1 to 80 is farcical, it should be more like 1 to 20. So, but yeah, they will all marry hand in hand and go together. So, but you will see nations, when you see nations in Europe demanding to repatriate gold and buying gold. And you see also nations in the East doing so. They're doing it for a good reason. And, I mean, unlike some, Americans who think that you should buy lots of dollars and dump gold,
You mean
for some
like our
reason,
vaunted economic advisor, Cocaine Kudlow?
well, I mean, Kudlow came up with the viewpoint, and funnily enough, I don't know why, but nations even nations in Europe, and if you travel east from there, they tend to disagree for some reason. I mean, maybe they're all
Because they're
clueless
not
and they have no
sophisticated
idea.
like us in the West, Paul.
Yeah, maybe they've got no idea what they're talking about. I mean, they could just be, but no. Jokes aside, no.
Great time to buy the dollar. It's a good time to have a long position in the dollar.
Yeah, I mean, he may have not. Well, maybe it's on the basis that, I mean, that's the other thing. People talk about the dollar index. Yeah, the dollar index has fallen quite sharply, but of course, a significant proportion and a majority is in that sort of basket is the euro. So really, all you're seeing is people moving out of the dollar into the euro. Well, that's like, for me, jumping out of a frying pan, into a frying pan, basically. So it's no kind of, it's not like anybody's particularly has a major downer on the dollar, other than people moving into the euro. It's not like everyone's flying into every other currency. And partly the reason the euro's strengthened is because nations like Iran are talking about trading, and they want to trade with Europe in the euro in the process to circumvent the dollar issue. But maybe he thinks, the dollar's bottomed and we're going to see a resurgence and a stronger dollar. But I mean, the question I would ask him is, how exactly does a strong dollar benefit the United States? Maybe.
Well, it goes with our tariffs. It's going to work wonderfully.
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, I do have to say, I think I mean, for all people, the criticisms of Cohen and, I've got to say, Kudlow, I have to question why he's
Just
being
refer to
brought
him as
in.
cocaine. We'll refer to him from here on out, Paul, as simply cocaine. But go ahead.
I mean, I think it was in 2007, he came out with a classic comment that we're not in a recession and everything's fine. Or something like, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but
folks,
I mean,
that's your new economic advisor. 2007, subprime is about to blow, and Cocaine Kudlow, after doing a couple of lines, gets there on CNBS and says everything is fine. We're not in a recession. The market's looking strong. Buy the dollar.
I mean, to be fair, he wasn't exactly unique in that regard. But I don't know. I maybe I think it's got to the point, really. It doesn't really matter who's in the chief economic advisor or what the Treasury does. I mean, or the Feds or anyone else. Because if we come back to the point we made earlier, well, perhaps the cabal is running out of money to finance things. Really, maybe that's become obvious, and they're going, well, do you know, it really just doesn't matter what anyone says anymore, because it's game over, and we don't have the ability to finance anything. And when that day comes, of course, then where does the US turn to? I mean, well, the obvious place it would turn to is to beg Chinese to bail them out. Well, if you're going to start putting massive tariffs on Chinese produce such as steel and aluminium, they might just go, you know what, we're not going to do that. So it again just proves how short-sighted it is to go after the Chinese. At the end of the day, the sensible decision to make. I mean, there is the argument, yeah, it'll wreck the cabal in the process. Well, yes, it probably will, but I think if it was me sat in the White House, I would say, well, yeah, we can do that, but maybe we need to do something else which will actually invigorate and stimulate the US economy. And let's try and encourage some Chinese investment and in terms of rebuilding our economy, rather than taking the latter approach. But I suppose the question is do you really need to destroy the cabal's economic powerhouse, or because the dollar's dying all by itself, and really you don't have to do anything to help them in that regard? Maybe start to look to regenerate the US economy, because the problem is, if the Chinese pull the plug and the reset happens tomorrow, which it won't, but if it does, then what happens to the dollar? Well, immediately the dollar's going to be devalued. Well, devalued dollar with no internal market for manufacture, or relatively very little, means hello, the United States, welcome to Venezuela.
Yep.
And that I mean, that's the thing that you think should be figuring in the intelligent debate going on in the White House. And but I don't know, maybe the intelligent debate's there, but there's no real evidence of that. But I think at the end of the day, it does. Kudlow will say what he says, and it doesn't really matter, because what's going to happen is going to happen, and lightning is going to strike twice in some capacity in terms of the 2007 comment. It's just that the buy the dollar and sell gold in 2 or 3 years time we'll be reflecting on those comments, going, well, maybe not the wisest thing anyone's ever said.
No. The thing is, Paul, when you look at it this way, we are literally, by every metric of the word, every definition, we're a third world country, and we have third world politics, we have third world infrastructure, and the only thing that's left right now, Paul, is to have a third world currency, and that would complete the cycle. That would complete the cycle. That's the only thing that's missing. We're a third world country. We have third world infrastructure. We have third world corrupt politicians. Oh my God, we are officially banana republic standards. Okay, only thing that's missing is a third world currency. Yeah, that's coming. I can feel it, Paul. It's coming.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, I don't see how there's any way around it. I mean, the only alternative is if somebody came to the US and said, okay, well, we're not going to trust that you've got deep storage gold. We're not going to, show. Let's have a proper audit of your gold. Oh, hang on a minute, you've got, well, a few $1 billion. So let's be realistic. Okay, well, what's the shortfall in terms of your gold requirements? Well, the biggest problem is, I mean, as we said the other day, even if gold was at $10,000 an ounce, I think we said that the US would be hemorrhaging 2,000 tons of gold a year on their trade deficit. Well, there's a major problem to start with. The only sensible solution is to reindustrialize the US and therefore reduce the balance of payments deficit, and therefore that would therefore give some strength to and credence to the currency. But what's the alternative? China leases the US gold and says you can back your currency with gold. It's inconceivable.
And they offered that to us. They've offered that to us, if you remember, like about 2 years ago.
Yeah, there was suggestions that there was talk of them doing that.
And they said we could lease it to you. You could vault it in Singapore, no problems.
I mean, but the thing is, the likelihood is it's not going to happen. So the US will have to, and there's the other thing, of course, when they're forced to have an audit, and the audit comes back and goes, 8,000 tons, no. 800 tons, no.
Paul, there's probably a barrel. There's like a fish barrel in the middle of Fort Knox.
80 tons, no. Then the credibility is shot to bits. I mean, it's a monumental shift in terms of credibility for them to spend years claiming that we have 8,300, 8,100 and whatever tons of gold, and then, well, actually we can't prove it. I mean, they're not going to be able to come out and go, we've got it, and the world will go, okay, fine, we believe you.
We have deep storage gold, Paul. Deep storage.
Yeah, as we said, it's at the Earth's core and it's currently molten. I mean,
you have to go and get it.
Yeah, but that is a huge problem. So, I mean, I've not heard any explanation as to how the US manages to wriggle out of this mess, and it's not unique because, I mean, I don't see much hope for the UK in the future. Yeah, the UK has got a bit more gold than the US has, and obviously proportionally its economy is not as big, but it's got huge economic problems. But the UK is staring down the barrel of third world economy, and the fear is that the UK and the US particularly are just going to become isolated pariahs on the world stage, because at some point as much as everyone's aware of the US involvement in things, the reality is the UK's hardly comes out smelling of roses in terms of their foreign policy and how they've conducted themselves globally for many decades and beyond. That when that reality comes out, the world's going to turn against the UK in the process. So the risk is the UK and the US, not exclusively, could become pariah states where the world just says, you're on your own. You're going to have to prove to us that you're worthy of us even engaging with you after what you've subjected the rest of the world to for decades and beyond. I mean, it's an interesting point, and something that the history books don't record is the fact that World War II was perfectly avoidable and would have been avoided, except that before obviously 1939 and considerably before, Hitler came to Britain or discussed with the UK and wanted to form an alliance. If the alliance had happened, World War II would never have happened. And the UK flatly went against it because they knew full well that the plan was to have World War II. Now, I wonder if that becomes a reality, how people will look at it and go, hang on, are you serious? But that's reality. That is exactly what didn't happen and precipitated the cause of World War II. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that came about. But rather than the official line of what went on. But it's interesting that when the history books reflect that true reality rather than the sort of fiction of what led to World War II, or in fact no mention of the fact that he wanted to form an alliance with the UK. I mean, ironically, it's very difficult to ascertain what would have happened geopolitically as a result of it. But I think the one thing is that the UK would have been a strong economic nation. Now, of that, there's no doubt. But the UK, of course, was. If you go back to the Industrial Revolution, the UK was the world's strongest nation by a mile. And it made some massive, huge mistakes, and its arrogance. And once again, we talk about failed empires. Well, the UK is a classic example of a failed empire through arrogance, ignorance, and treating with disdain the people across the world that made Britain the empire it was. Well, history just repeating itself over and over again with regard to the fact that effectively, for want of the dollar empires collapsing for the same reason. I don't use the word US because it's got nothing to do with the US or the US people, but the dollar empires collapsing for exactly the same reason.
No, absolutely correct. That's exactly what's happening. We haven't learned a darn thing whatsoever. We have learned nothing when it comes to how empires die. We've literally taken the worst of prior Western civilizations that we incorporated on our own, and somehow, and all the while, we're going down in flames, thinking we're the greatest country in the world. We're going down in flames, yelling at the world, "Look how free we are!" I think it was a Russian philosopher who says the American will go into his slavery, beating his chest and declaring to the world how free he is, and the rest of the world will just look at him and just snicker. It's true.
Well, unfortunately, for a long time, I mean, and not just the US, but in terms of Western nations, they've become the kind of being ridiculed by nations across the world in terms of they just don't take Washington or London seriously anymore, and that's why they're just standing up now and saying we're not tolerating this. But there's meetings in the UN and the British and the Americans are, Nikki Haley being an example, as we said, and when she's out the room, everyone just laughs and goes, "This is ridiculous." Well, so what? Now the adults are left in the room. What are we going to do? And that's been the reality for some time, and it's an indication that and Lavrov's comments. I think someone should put that on a T-shirt and sell it, because that'll be a comment that in years to come that people will reflect and say, yeah, absolutely, it's true, and it is probably a 500-year empire. It is, and the other thing is, this may surprise people, and undoubtedly some people aren't going to like me saying this, but there's always big plays and big things mentioned to do with the Rothschilds and and their standing in the world. At one time, yes, they had a significantly bigger standing, but not anymore. They're not. They also ran. Not. They're not big players in the world anymore. They haven't been. They just. There's this folklore that surrounds them,
There's a
but it's
lot of
just
folklore.
it's simply not true anymore. They and do not have the sway. They don't have the influence that they once had, and historically that's absolutely true. But they've been in decline themselves for quite a long time, and so we have to guard against people suggesting, "Oh, these people are responsible," and all central banks are controlled by the Rothschilds. No, they're absolutely not controlled by the Rothschilds. And before anyone says, no, I'm not related to the Rothschilds. No, I'm not an apologist. I'm not an apologist for the Rothschild or anything like that.
I don't
So
know, Paul,
let's
you
just
sound
get,
pretty
yeah.
suspect to me. Sounds like you could be a Rothschild plant.
But there's a reality. Yeah, there's a cabal, there's a deep state, call it what you like, but it's not, folklore needs to give way to reality, and the reality will eventually come to pass where, though there are plenty of people who have a huge stake in terms of the cabal that no one knows even exist, and there's people that the people think are a big player in it, and they're not, and somewhere in between, yes, there are big players that people know exist, but no, the Rothschilds aren't the big players on the world stage anymore that people think they are, and it's but that doesn't mean there aren't big influential players in the UK who do play a part. Of course they are, but it's not that. And that's the big. I mean, it's like, there's some big players in the US now trying to wrestle control of the deep state from their claws in everything, and people won't even necessarily know who they are. And
Well,
there's
I can
plenty of
rest
big,
easy knowing that Mike Pompeo is the Secretary of State. I can sleep well that Gail Haslop is the psycho woman is in charge of the CIA. Nikki Haley's running her mouth. I mean, things seem to be going quite well here, Paul.
Well, it's interesting. I can't. I mean, I put a podcast out for our subscribers, which is kind of talking about a whole bunch of things, including this. So I'm not going to go into detail, but let's just say the world looks very black and white, but in fact, it's 1,000 shades of grey. So, and I think we just have to leave it at that. Maybe in a
That
couple
sounds
of weeks,
erotic, Paul.
we'll discuss what I say, because a lot of people won't have even listened to it yet, and I think it's a bit rich for me to start talking about it. But no, the reality is that, and there's some major players in the world that no one knows who they are, and it's better the world doesn't know who they are, but they've been big fundamental players in changing the whole way that the Chinese operate, the way the Russians operated, and no one knows who they are, and no one will ever know who they are, but they are, the unsung heroes that made the world change, and were hugely influential in the process. And it's good, and these people don't want the world to know who they are. They just do it because they care for humanity, and in a way, that's all that matters to them. And being celebrities, being known by the world, is of no interest to them. And frankly, it's better that probably the world doesn't know who they are, because they can have a nice, peaceful life, and because no one knows who they are, and it's better it is that way. But so nothing is, as we say, everything's 1,000 shades of grey, and certainly how the world is operating and who are influential players. I mean, yeah, Putin and Xi are definitely big players, but who's the driving force behind those people? That what made them shift the dynamic and see the world differently and want to do things differently? They're the people who are the real big movers and shakers in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, final closing comments, man. Go for it.
It's like one of those things you can't really just sort of. It's like, well, okay, we're off now. Bye. It's so difficult. You can't kind of wind down a conversation. I mean, I think the only way to say is just watch closely. I mean, look for the big catalytic events, the comments that come out the East. I mean, and then see the reaction of the West. And the latest thing, which Skripal's a great example, or Putin's comments to the Russian military. Let's see, just how big an impact the petro-yuan is when it's released. I don't expect it to be seismic initially, but over the next weeks and months, let's see what the impact, and more well, if the Saudis come out and tell the world, we're adopting the petro yuan, then yeah, that's seismic. But let's see the reaction of the players in the West. It's kind of, we're now actually it's interesting to watch what's going on in the West. Previously, it was pretty, well, no one really cares what they're saying, but let's see how they react, because the reaction tells us in a very big way the reality of how the 500-year empire is collapsing. And I think that's really the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree wholeheartedly with Lavrov and what he said. The 500-year empire is literally falling apart, and there's nothing they can do about it. There's nothing they could do about it. They thought that they can control this whole entire thing with their paper manipulations and whatnot, and now they're on the outside looking in. Very well said. Very well said. With that being said, folks, again, check out London Paul's website, theseriousreport.com, theseriousreport.com. We are roguemoney.net. Subscribe, comment, share. With that being said, we're over and out. Take it away, CJ.